Hello, I'm Ray Abbas, and I work with the Resilient Families Program. Today, we're going to discuss creating a resume. Even though the popularity of online applications continues to grow, there are still a lot of positions that require you to submit a resume. So it's really important that you're prepared with the very best resume you can possibly put together. So at the end of this brief workshop, you won't be an expert at putting together a resume, but you'll have the foundation to get started. So please contact your case manager so they can help you support your efforts in order to create the best possible resume for your job search. So we're going to just jump right in it and talk about the purpose of a resume. So the primary purpose of a resume is to market yourself to employers. I have seen several hundreds of resumes over many years, and I will say that most of them are not really good. So this is an opportunity for you to get a major leg up on having a resume that will compete with the other resumes that are out there. And so when an employer is going through and flipping through resumes, they are looking for a first impression. And so a good resume is going to get you off to the right start. Otherwise, you might be put off to the side and not considered. So number one reason for a resume is to market yourself. Secondly, it's your way of showing an employer that you have the skills, the abilities, and the education that matches the requirements of the job. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a couple of more slides. The other thing is it's what earns you the interview. You know, if they're looking through resumes, they're trying to figure out, you know, maybe they're interviewing 5 people, maybe they're interviewing 10, but your resume, if that's what they're requiring for you to apply for a job, your resume is what is going to get you that interview. All right, so we're going to talk about the 2 different kinds of resumes. So there's 2 types of resumes. There's a chronological and a functional resume. So let me tell you a little bit about both of those. A chronological resume is simply a resume that starts with the last job you had and goes backwards. Usually, if you're using a chronological resume, it's because you have a pretty good work history. You don't have a lot of large gaps between your jobs, and your work history shows some career advancement. So maybe you're going from like a frontline worker to a manager, or, you know, kind of moving up within the ranks of the company. So, so a chronological resume, again, starts with the most recent job that you've had and goes backwards. The second type of resume is a functional resume. A functional resume groups your skills in a way that downplays your work history. So a functional resume would more likely be divided into categories like retail, food service, warehouse. So it's more of a focus on the skills and less of a focus on your work history. So generally, people who use a functional resume are people that have some gaps in their work history, or maybe they've moved around a lot. I don't really like the word job hopping much, but it's kind of what it is. You know, you move around a lot from job to job, and people who have changed careers. So, you know, if you've drastically, if your career change is pretty drastic, you've gone from, you know, doing administrative work to being a truck driver, the types of skills that you have are going to be so different that you might look at doing a functional resume. But I tell you the truth though, the functional resume, a lot of employers have caught on that when they see a functional resume, again, a functional resume is organized by skills more than work history. When they see a functional resume, sometimes they think, well, maybe this person has a lot of gaps in their work history, or they are moving around from job to job a lot. So my strong recommendation would be to focus on trying to do a chronological resume whenever possible. And so that's what I'm going to try to focus on during this time that we have together, is focusing on putting together a chronological resume. Okay, so there's a couple of sections to a resume. Your contact information, a summary of qualifications, your work experience, and your education. So notice that I did not list objective. Objective is kind of an outdated section now. You might think of, you've probably seen objective as when people say a company that is dedicated to its employees, where I can grow and advance within the company. An objective is really just it doesn't really tell a lot. It's very generic, and so that's become outdated now. So you don't have to have an objective. Your resume is going to start with your contact information and move forward to your summary of qualifications. Another section that you don't see on here is references. References aren't part of a resume. References are completely separate. And so you will have a separate sheet, a separate page for your references, and it will not be a part of your resume. Last thing on this, before we get into some of these sections, is ideally you want to keep your resume to one page. For positions that probably won't have a lot of candidates, so sometimes the more professional level the positions are, the more you can maybe have 2 pages, because maybe they're getting 25 or 50 or sometimes even 100 resumes. So if it's 2 pages, it's okay. It's not that burdensome on the employer. But if you're applying for a position that could get hundreds of resumes, your likely best chance of that employer really looking at your resume fully is to have a 1-page resume and try to make it as clear and concise as you can. So let's talk about just the basic of basic, and that's your contact information. So you need to make sure that you have your name, address, your home or cell phone number, and an email address. It's always going to be at the top of the page. And you need to have a telephone number that accepts voicemail. Often I have called folks that have applied for positions, and you call and it says that that number doesn't accept voicemail messages. If you're in the middle of a job search and you are competing with other people who are also in the middle of a job search, you don't want to miss out on an opportunity because an employer called and they couldn't leave you a message. Because if it's a really competitive situation, they might not call again. They may not try to reach out to you again. They may go to the next person. So it's really important to have a phone and a number that accepts messages. The other thing I would probably, that I would mention is, if possible, to try to have a professional looking email address. Sometimes, we have our personal life and we have our work life. And so you want to try and have an email address that you're going to provide to employers that looks professional and something that you would be proud to provide to an employer. So here's just a couple of examples of just the contact information and how you can list that on the top of your resume. With the contact information, it's really kind of personal preference. As long as all the information is there, you've accomplished what you need to with the contact information. I am constantly amazed at how often people will forget to put a telephone number or their email address. So please make sure that you have all that information. You don't know if an employer might choose to email you something or give you a phone call. So just make sure that you have all that information so they can reach out to you. The next section of your resume is your summary of qualifications. Your summary of qualifications highlights the skills and the abilities that you want to bring to your employer's attention. We're going to talk a little bit more about this more specifically, as well as a tip for doing this is that you can use the job description for the position that you're applying for as a guide to putting together this section. Also, you never want to list a skill or ability that you aren't prepared to demonstrate if you are asked. So, during an interview process, if you've put that you are that you're proficient at Microsoft Word or Excel, or you say that you can type a certain number of words per minute, you want to be able to demonstrate that if you were asked to. So it's really important to make sure that as a part of your summary of qualifications that you're not listing any skills or abilities that you aren't prepared to demonstrate if they ask you. So here are a couple of examples of some things that you would list as a summary of qualifications. Okay, so let's make an important difference here. Okay, so qualifications are different than duties. We're going to talk about duties when we get to the work experience section, but qualifications are more along the lines of some of these examples. How many years of experience you have doing a certain job. For example, in the 8 years of retail experience in a clothing store. Things like familiar with Microsoft Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. If you are more than just familiar, let's say you are you want to say that you're an expert user at Microsoft Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. Things like that. Those types of technology or programs, computer programs that you are familiar with, or in some cases maybe at an advanced level. Other examples: type 45 words per minute, ability to operate a forklift, pallet jack, and hoist, knowledge of food safety guidelines, CPR and AED certified. These are just examples of the types of qualifications that you might have to have depending on what position that you are applying for. So with my examples, I purposefully were all over the board. You know, maybe you can relate to retail experience. Maybe you can relate to maybe administrative work where you're using lots of computer programs and doing a lot of data entry and typing. Maybe you have done food service. So the summary of qualifications is one of the primary sections that you will want to tailor to customize to the job that you're applying for. So, for example, if you are doing food service, knowledge of food safety guidelines and other qualifications that relate to working in the food service industry would be the summary, would be the examples that you would list as part of your summary of qualifications. If you've done administrative work, your familiarity with different computer programs and data entry and you know, the utilization of office equipment, that would be some of the items that you would put as your summary of qualifications. I would suggest that you have 4 or 5 bullet points as part of your summary of qualifications. And I'll give you what I've found to be a really helpful tip is that you look at the job description that you're applying for, and you can literally take sometimes from that job description and list some of those things in your summary of qualifications. And what it will do is it will immediately show an employer that your qualifications match very closely with the qualifications that they've listed in their job description. So that to me is one of the most important points that I'm gonna make during this brief presentation, and that is you really want to customize your summary of qualifications for the job that you're applying for. Because if you're an employer and you're putting out a job description and then you look at someone's resume and immediately as the top section of the resume, it's going to immediately start showing as bullet points qualifications that they have listed in their job description. It's going to show, hey, this person has the basic qualifications for this job. And I think that'll immediately put you in a better position to get an interview because you're already showing that you have some of those basic qualifications. All right, so now let's talk about how you're going to list your experience. So I've just put an example here of somebody that's working at CAC. So you have the name of the business. Off to the right side, you have the city, state. Below the business, you have the job title, and then you have the dates in which that person worked. If you're still working the position, then it would just be, for the dates, it would just say to the present. That would indicate that you're still doing the job. Couple of tips here for city, state. You don't have to put zip code, you don't have to put full addresses, and when you do the state, it's 2 capital letters. It used to be different a long time ago. It was a capital letter and a small letter. It's just 2 capital letters. Um, if you're doing when you're doing your dates, all you have to do is you can just do date, you can just do the month and year. You don't have to have exact dates. You're just doing the month and the year. Worst case scenario, you could do just the year. So in my example, I have July 2018 to March 2020. If you couldn't figure out like which month you started, you could do 2018 to 2020. I wouldn't recommend that, because what happens is if you have more than one job in the same year, then it would look like you're saying, 2017 to 2017, and that wouldn't look as good. A helpful tip, as I've helped lots of people over the years do resumes, a lot of times people tell me, well, I don't remember the dates. I don't remember the dates. Well, my suggestion to you would be do the very best you can. Think about things that will help you remember the date. When for example, when you started that job, was it in the summer? Maybe your kids weren't in school, so then maybe that means it was maybe June or July. Was it, it seemed like it was around the holidays, so then maybe it was November or December. Anything that might help you narrow it down so you can have that month. Then, once you've done that, my advice to you would be that becomes the time frames you use from that point forward. What you don't want to do is have resumes and applications that are floating out there during your job search, and many of them have different dates for when you work certain jobs. So my advice would be, once you settle on some dates, when you're doing this resume, or let's say you've recently done an application, I think you need to take the dates that you've used, and that needs to be the dates you use moving forward. So you're not constantly changing up the dates that you're using on resumes and applications. That's just my helpful hint, my 2 cents worth on that, because I have experienced a lot of folks that say, I just don't remember the dates of when I worked some of these jobs. Okay, so continuing with the experience section. Okay, so underneath the position, what you're going to do is you're going to describe your duties, responsibilities, and accomplishments. And so this is where, when we were talking about the summary of qualifications, this is where we're talking about the duties and not the skills. So let's talk about this a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit about some examples. Okay, so first, you only want to go back about 8 to 10 years. You don't want to just go as far back as your work history goes, because, well, there's several reasons. One is it's probably just going to be too much. It's going to go beyond the 1 page, maybe 2 pages at the most, that you really need to be focused on. But the other reason is, if you go too far back, they'll use that time frame to start calculating your age, and we don't want them to have any information that might allow them to discriminate based on age. So you only want to go back about 8 to 10 years. In some cases, maybe not even 8 years. But at the most, you want to go back 8 to 10 years. All right, so you're using a bullet point format rather than a paragraph format. So just like with summary of qualifications, you're simply going to have bullet points underneath the position that you're working. So you have the job, just like in our previous example where we had community action committee, and that person was a case manager. Underneath there, you're going to have bullets that show your duties and responsibilities. So you're going to use a bullet point format. You want to try to have at least 4 to 5 bullet points under each job. And one helpful tip when it comes to this is sometimes people struggle with being able to explain what their duties are, what their responsibilities are, especially when they're trying to write them out and they're doing a resume and sometimes they're just overthinking it. Just pretend you are explaining the work that you did to a friend. If they just ask you, well, so you work there, okay, well, what do you do there? As what you would explain to them is often just as simple as it is to put bullet points to say what kinds of duties and responsibilities you have. The last point here is each bullet point starts with an action verb. So unlike how it used to be when people would say, I did such and such, this would be an action verb. So some of you may have resumes right now, and maybe you have it in a paragraph format, or you have like a narrative where you're just saying, I operated a forklift to move items in a warehouse. Well, instead of saying I operated a forklift, you would just say operated a forklift to move items in a warehouse. So really all you're doing is taking that I off of what you've done in some cases and starting with an action verb. And so we have a couple examples here of just a variety of different bullet points that someone could have. Supervise 5 salespersons, including providing them training and creating their work schedule. Increase production by 50% in 3 months. Whether it's duties like supervising salespeople, or like in the third example here, taught preschool children their alphabet and numbers, earned a perfect attendance certificate in 2019. You're starting with an action verb. You are listing a duty or responsibility or an accomplishment that you made while on the job. Often, again, this is a spot where people sometimes have a hard time putting some of these bullet points together. But I think if you think of the work that you did and think about it just like you were going to describe it to someone, I think you'll find that those bullet points will pop out just as if you were describing it to someone. Okay, so the last section in a resume is the education section. So you're always going to list the most recent degrees, certificates, or diplomas first. If you have several different education or training, you only want to list the ones that are applicable that apply, basically that apply to the job that you're applying for. So if you have a CDL, a truck driving license, and you're applying for positions that have absolutely nothing to do with having a CDL, a truck driving license, then there's no need to list that. If you enrolled in a program but you didn't complete it, you can still include it on your resume. And I have an example on the next slide just to show how you can, how you can word that, how you can show that. The other thing is, do not list dates on your education. So don't list graduation dates. Those dates are always, the only thing those dates are going to accomplish is to possibly allow them to calculate your age. If you put that you graduated from Austin East High School or Fulton High School or wherever the case might be, and you put that you graduated in 1988, well, they can say 18 years old is about when you graduated, and then calculate how many years that is, and then they feel like they've got an idea of what your age is. Again, what we don't want to provide to an employer is anything that they can use to discriminate in any way, shape, or form when you're applying for positions. So no need to list dates. If you've been to college, or you've been to like a technical school that essentially required a high school diploma, then you can just put the college or the technical school, and you don't have to also list the high school, because in most cases, the fact that, if you attended college or a university or community college or a technical school, likely means that you completed your high school diploma or equivalency, so you don't have to put your high school diploma. And that'll also save some room on the page, because you're not having to list your high school education, and you can just go right into listing the post-secondary, the university or community college or technical school that you attended. Okay. So here's just a couple of quick, just an example of what it would look like when you have your education on there. In the first example, Tennessee College of Applied Technology, Knoxville, Tennessee, just simply welding diploma. Okay. In the example where maybe you attended a community college or university, but you didn't finish, you can simply put, after Pellissippi State Community College, you could put completed 25 credit hours in business management. That way, you're showing that you have some of those college credits, but you're also making sure that you're being truthful. You're not showing that you received a degree or diploma from a post-secondary school, but you're just showing that you have the credit hours completed. So that was just a really brief rundown of the 4 sections of a resume. I, again, would strongly encourage you to begin putting some of this information together, and then speaking to your case manager and working to get this completed. So that way you have a resume that you can feel proud of, and when you're job searching and you run across that job that you are really interested in and they ask you for a resume, then you're prepared to submit a resume. All right, well, this concludes the resume writing workshop.